99% of my listeners watch without subscribing. Please press the subscribe button and leave a like on the video, my dear listeners. It will help the channel grow during these difficult times. My name is Olivia, 34 years old, and I work as a trauma surgeon at a Level 1 trauma center in the Midwest, where every minute is measured in survival probability and every decision is recorded in a chart that someone will read in court someday. I have always lived independently, paid my own way, and built a career that the women in my family treat as a personal insult. My hands are not soft. They're not supposed to be soft. They open chests, clamp bleeding vessels, and reconstruct the inside of a stranger after a freeway pileup. I never apologized for that fact until my mother trained me to apologize every Sunday, every holiday, every time I picked up the phone. My family had decided years ago that my profession was a hostile language, and they spoke that language back to me through quiet ridicule whenever I entered a room. The job pays well because it is unglamorous. I work nights and weekends and holidays. I miss birthdays. I have stood over a teenager whose femoral artery was fontaining onto my shoes, and I have not allowed myself to flinch because flinching costs survival points. I have told a husband his wife did not make it. I have told a mother her 17-year-old will never walk again. The reward for that work is a salary that lets me cover bills, save reasonably, and absorb my parents' lifestyle without complaining out loud. My sister calls that absorption, having extra. My mother calls it the responsibility of the eldest daughter. My aunt calls it what families are for. During our last family barbecue, the kind staged on the lawn behind my parents' condominium with rented linens and a hired bartender that I had funded, my mother raised her glass of Pinot Grigio in front of 14 guests, paused for the room to settle, and announced, "We love Olivia, but real women have soft hands and soft voices. She'll be replaceable the day she gets older. Surgery is a young person's job, sweetheart, and you are not getting any younger." My Aunt Carol laughed loud enough to qualify as endorsement. My younger sister Bella, who built an Instagram brand on lifestyle content, filmed it on her phone, smiled at the lens, and mouthed something to her followers. My father said nothing, which was its own statement. The comment was not a slip. It was rehearsed. My mother had said versions of it for years, but she had refined this version for an audience. 40 minutes later, in the kitchen, my mother handed me a folded contractor estimate for a remodel that totaled $28,000 and asked whether I could help with the deposit, since you don't really spend on yourself anyway. She said it in the same warm tone she had used when she humiliated me in front of guests. The two events were not separate. They were a single procedure in which one part softened me with shame and the other part extracted compensation. I held that estimate for 10 seconds without responding. Then I asked her if the remodel was urgent. She said it was overdue. I asked her what overdue meant in her household. She said the granite was outdated and that her friends would notice. I said I would let her know after the weekend. She accepted that with the expression of a person who had heard yes. I drove home that night without playing music. I thought about every recurring charge tied to my name. I paid the mortgage on the condominium they lived in. I held a life insurance policy on my mother where the premium drafted from my account every month and the beneficiary was my sister. I covered health insurance for my aunt who had been temporarily on my plan for 3 years. I funded a credit card with a $40,000 limit that my sister used to underwrite a content career. I paid for my mother's personal trainer. I funded my sister's leased ring light, leased camera, and Adobe Creative Cloud subscription. I paid the family streaming bundle. I covered my parents' annual cruise. The list extended in directions I had not bothered to map. If a surgeon like me is replaceable, then the financial structures attached to my name are also replaceable. Resuscitation has a clear rule. You stop compressions when continuing harms the team. I had been performing economic CPR on my family for 9 years. I had bruised my own ribs to keep them breathing. Before we continue, tell me where you are watching from, what time it is in your city, and whether you have ever paid for a relative who mocked the work that funded their lifestyle. If you have, I want you to know that the language for what happened to you is not cruelty. It is medical futility. The protocol exists. Stay with me. The pattern began the year I finished residency. I had spent 11 years in training, including 2 as a fellow in trauma and surgical critical care, and I came out of fellowship with educational debt, a modest savings cushion, and a contract that finally produced an attending salary. My parents drove 90 minutes to my first attending dinner, photographed me in scrubs, and treated the celebration as a milestone for the family. Within 3 weeks of that dinner, my father was sitting at my kitchen table explaining that the local market had rotated against him and that he needed help with a couple of months of expenses. He had been laid off from a regional sales position. He was 58. He was certain he would land another role quickly. He framed the request as transitional, with a tone calibrated to invite a yes. I said yes. Saying yes was the first surgical error I had ever made outside the operating room. The couple of months extended into a year. He insisted he was interviewing. He never produced documentation. He told me that ageism had locked him out of his industry. He told me that searching at his level required time. He suggested that since I had moved into a higher tax bracket, supporting the household was both efficient and fair. He never used the word loan. He used the word help. He never proposed repayment. He proposed gratitude. I was new to attending pay. I was tired. I agreed. My mother adjusted to that arrangement with the speed of a person who had been preparing for it. She reframed financial care as moral identity. She said a daughter who counted dollars was a cold daughter. She said a real woman supports her family without keeping a ledger. She said that men of my father's generation deserved dignity, and that dignity required protection from reality. When I asked whether she could return to work, she described the local job market as hostile and her health as fragile. She had no chronic illness. She had not seen a primary care physician for an annual exam in 4 years. She used vague language to invoke vague vulnerabilities. She perfected the art of the gestured wince. She would press her fingers to her temple at strategic moments. She would mention dizziness and let the sentence trail. She built a pseudo-medical persona that allowed her to refuse responsibility without ever submitting to a diagnosis. Bella was 26 when the pattern hardened. She had decided that her career would be content creation. Her plan was specific only at the level of aesthetics. She filmed coffee, brunch, sunsets, and outfits. She filmed advice that she had not earned the standing to give. She built a following slowly, then quickly, and then plateaued at 80,000. She said followers paid her bills. They did not. I paid her bills. The credit card with the $40,000 limit that I had opened years earlier as a personal emergency fund had migrated, through her insistence, into her primary tool. She said brand visibility required visibility. She said the optics of struggle would alienate sponsors. She said a few $1,000s per month in rent, restaurants, props, lighting, and travel was an investment in our future. She used the pronoun "our" with deliberate softness. My Aunt Carol joined the chain through medical insurance. She had divorced and lost coverage. My mother begged me to add her temporarily because Carol was about to age into a marketplace plan and the gap was just 9 months. The temporary status moved into a permanent status without negotiation. Carol stopped pretending the gap was temporary. She used the policy and complained when copays appeared on her bill, even though I covered the copays through a supplemental account. She referred to herself as a person with insurance, as if the insurance had appeared through her own arrangements. My father observed the structure as it solidified and added components. He convinced me to co-sign on his vehicle loan during a moment when my credit score was clean and his was not. He explained that his rate would otherwise be punitive. He used my name on a small line of credit attached to a pickup. He persuaded me, during a particular birthday, to attach my insurance to his truck so that the premium would not exceed what he wanted to pay. He stitched himself into my financial profile in ways that did not announce themselves at the time, but became visible the morning I read every account. In their version of events, I had become the successful one, and that label converted into an obligation rather than a recognition. My career was a resource. My income was a budget line. My professional title was a marketing asset that allowed Bella to introduce her sister, the surgeon, when she wanted to add credibility to a wellness post. They never asked me about a difficult case. They never asked about a colleague. They never asked about the death of a 15-year-old whose mother screamed in the corridor at 3 in the morning. They asked about money in indirect ways, and they asked about money relentlessly. The morning after the barbecue, I called the hospital to request a personal day, which I rarely use. The scheduler accepted without comment because trauma attendings are entitled to a finite number of personal days, and I had used almost none. I made coffee. I sat at my dining table. I opened my laptop and a notebook. I treated the morning the way I treat a complicated case. I built a problem list. I prioritized by severity. I worked top-down. I started with the credit card carrying the $40,000 limit. I logged in and reviewed authorized users. Bella was on the card. She had been on the card for 5 years. I removed her access through the bank's online portal. The system asked for a second-factor verification through my phone. I approved the action. I requested a new physical card with a new number for myself, which would arrive within 5 business days. I scheduled an immediate temporary card lock to prevent any new charges. The bank confirmed the lock with a transaction ID. The interface required 2 clicks. The dependency it had created had required 9 years. Next, I reviewed the line of credit attached to my parents' household. I called the bank, verified my identity, and asked whether my account was the primary funding source for any standing transfers to my parents' account. The representative confirmed 2 recurring transfers, one for the condominium mortgage and one labeled monthly support. I paused both transfers. The representative offered to schedule the pause for the next billing cycle. I declined. I requested an immediate pause and a written confirmation by email. The confirmation arrived in 7 minutes. I forwarded it to a folder I had created that morning called Closure. I moved on to the auto insurance. The policy listed 3 vehicles: my sedan, my father's pickup, and my sister's compact car. I called the insurer. The agent ran through the verification questions. I asked her to remove the 2 non-primary vehicles, effective immediately. She explained that my multi-vehicle discount would adjust and my premium would decrease modestly. She also explained that Bella and my father would need to procure their own policies before the next 30 days or risk lapse. I said that was acceptable. I asked her to email confirmation of the removal and the effective dates. She did. The policy realignment took 14 minutes. Health insurance required more attention. Aunt Carol had been a dependent on my plan for 3 years through a creative interpretation of household composition that the insurer had not audited. The plan technically permitted certain dependent relationships under specific circumstances. Carol no longer qualified, if she ever had. I called the insurer's member services line. I explained that I needed to remove a dependent. The agent told me the next open enrollment window would not begin for several months and asked whether the removal qualified as a special enrollment event. I said the dependent had alternative coverage available through the marketplace and was no longer financially dependent on my household. The agent processed the change with effective date 30 days out, which is the standard period that protects continuity. She emailed confirmation. She also provided a list of marketplace and Medicare options that Carol could review depending on her age and income. I forwarded that list to a draft email address to Carol that I would send later. The mortgage on the condominium required different handling. The unit was titled in my name. I had purchased it 8 years earlier as an investment property, then allowed my parents to occupy it at no rent during my father's job loss. The arrangement had no written lease. It had no deposit. It had no rent transfer. I logged into the mortgage servicer's portal, reviewed the loan balance, and confirmed that payments were current. I drafted an email to my parents stating that beginning in 90 days, the unit would either transition to a fair market lease with a written agreement or be listed for sale. I cited a fair market rental rate based on 3 comparable units in the same complex. I attached the comparables. I left the email in drafts. I would send it later after I confirmed the legal mechanics with a real estate attorney. The life insurance policy on my mother was a financial structure I had agreed to in a moment of poor judgment. She had asked me to take out a policy on her life with my sister as beneficiary. She framed the request as estate planning. It was not estate planning. It was a transfer of risk and premium obligation from her household to mine, with a benefit that flowed to my sister. I called the insurer. I asked to terminate the policy. The agent explained the cancellation procedure. The cash value, if any, would refund to me as the policy owner. I authorized the cancellation. The agent confirmed an effective end date and emailed the paperwork. The premium had been $137 per month for 8 years. I had paid more than $13,000 to insure a person who treated my hands as evidence of failed femininity, and the benefit was scheduled to fund a sister who filmed me at parties for content. Personal trainer subscriptions were small but symbolic. My mother's trainer charged a monthly retainer that drafted from my checking account. The trainer's app was an independent processor. I logged in, canceled the recurring authorization, and emailed the trainer directly to inform him that the account would not renew. He replied politely and asked whether my mother would like to continue under her own credit card. I forwarded the question to the email I was drafting for my mother. Subscriptions stacked next. Adobe Creative Cloud for Bella. A leased ring light from a video equipment provider. A leased camera from a separate company. A streaming bundle that included 3 platforms, a music service, and a cloud storage tier. A wine club membership that arrived monthly at my parents' address. A magazine subscription my aunt had set up using my email. Each cancellation was a click. Each click required a confirmation. Each confirmation arrived. I copied each receipt into a spreadsheet that I had begun keeping with 3 columns: name of charge, monthly amount, status. The family cruise booking presented a more delicate question. My parents had reserved a Caribbean cruise for the following spring, 8 months out, and the down payment had been routed through a card that I had since canceled. The cruise line had sent a polite notification asking for an updated payment method. I called the cruise line. I asked whether the booking could be transferred into my parents' name. The representative explained that primary booking holders carried liability for the entire reservation and that a transfer required the new holder to qualify financially. I said that I no longer wished to be the primary holder. The representative offered me 3 options. Cancel and accept a partial refund minus penalties. Allow the booking to lapse and forfeit deposits. Transfer the booking after the new holder accepted full liability and submitted updated payment information. I selected the cancellation. The penalty was substantial. It was less substantial than continuing to fund a vacation for people who toasted my replaceability with the wine I had also paid for. Phone plans came after lunch. My family operated on a shared plan in my name with 5 lines, including my mother, father, sister, aunt, and a long decommissioned line that had once belonged to a deceased uncle and which the carrier had never properly closed. I called the carrier. The representative was patient. She explained the process for separating lines and the need for each line holder to provide proof of identity and a credit qualification before transferring to an independent contract. She offered to schedule outbound calls to each holder to walk them through the transition. I declined. I asked her to draft individualized transition letters for each line. She did. I asked her to lock the plan to prevent new line additions. She did. I confirmed the closure of the deceased uncle's line, which freed a small monthly charge that had been accruing for 2 years. Streaming and consumer accounts wound up the morning. I removed family members from shared library access on a major retailer. I removed them from a music streaming family plan. I removed them from a cloud storage family plan. I removed them from a meal kit subscription that my mother had configured as a recurring gift to herself. I removed Bella from authorized users on a photography software suite. I removed all of them from my account at a wholesale warehouse club whose membership I had upgraded to the household tier years earlier. Each removal required a click or 2. Each removal generated a confirmation email. By the time the morning was done, my inbox showed 47 new emails, all confirmations of the small administrative work that had unwound 9 years of dependency. I closed the laptop. I drank a glass of water. I sat with the work for 10 minutes without answering any messages. The dining table did not look different. The apartment did not look different. The decision did not feel emotional. It felt like a closure note. In trauma documentation, you finish a case by writing a closure note that describes the operative findings, the procedures performed, and the patient's status at the end of the case. I had just written that note for my family. My phone began to vibrate around 3 in the afternoon. The first message was from my mother. She wrote that the credit card had been declined at her hair salon. The salon owner had asked her if she had a different card. She wrote that the situation was embarrassing and that I needed to call my bank and resolve whatever error had occurred. I read the message. I did not respond immediately. I waited until I had a clean 10-minute window. Then I wrote back that the card had been canceled by me, intentionally, and that the cancellation had been processed correctly. I told her that she could call my father about the salon bill, or pay it herself. I did not include an apology. She did not believe the message. She called. I did not answer. She called again. I did not answer. She left a voicemail in which her voice oscillated between maternal disappointment and rehearsed pain. She said that I had embarrassed her. She said that I had made a scene out of a small private problem. She said that we needed to talk. I listened to the voicemail twice. I returned the call when I felt ready. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. I told her that the salon problem was not a salon problem. The salon problem was a cancellation problem. The card had been canceled because the financial relationship had ended. She told me that I sounded different. I told her that I sounded clear. She told me that I sounded heartless. I told her that heartlessness and clarity are often confused by people who benefit from confusion. She hung up. My sister Bella called next. Her tone was casual. She wanted to know if I had updated my credit card because hers had been declined when she tried to renew her Adobe subscription. She used the word ours twice in the first 30 seconds. I told her that the card had been canceled and that the Adobe subscription had also been canceled, along with several others. She laughed once, the laugh of a person who could not yet calibrate the situation, and asked when the new card would arrive. I told her that the new card would arrive, but that she would not be on it. She paused. Then she shifted into a different register. She said that I was sabotaging her career. She said that her followers depended on consistent content. She said that I was prioritizing my own comfort over her livelihood. I told her that her livelihood had never been a livelihood. I told her that an income that draws from a sibling's credit line is a subsidy, and a subsidy that is unreviewed is theft from someone who agreed to it under social pressure. She told me that I was being cruel. I told her that her livelihood was a hobby with cosmetic legitimacy, and that hobbies do not entitle their participants to other people's accounts. My father called in the evening. He asked me whether the auto insurance change had been deliberate. I told him it had been. He asked me to reverse it. I told him I would not. He raised his voice. He told me that I had jeopardized his ability to drive to interviews. I told him that he had not been interviewing for years, and that the rare drives he made were for personal errands. He told me that I was disrespecting him. I told him that respect did not require sponsorship. He paused. Then he said something he had not said before. He said, "If you do this, you are choosing money over family." I told him that for 9 years, money had been the only mechanism by which I had been allowed to express family. I told him that ending that mechanism was not a rejection of family. It was a rejection of a definition of family that had been engineered to exploit me. He hung up. My Aunt Carol called the next morning. She had received a notice that her health insurance would terminate in 30 days. Her tone was different from my mother's. She did not perform shock. She performed grievance. She said that I was punishing her for choices she had not made. I told her that the choice she had not made was the choice to obtain her own coverage. I told her that the marketplace existed, that subsidies were available based on her income, and that the timeline allowed her to enroll without a coverage gap. She told me that the forms were complicated. I told her that complexity is not an inheritance. I told her that the system she was about to use existed exactly to serve people in her income range, and that her age and circumstances might qualify her for additional support. She told me she would think about it. I sent her an email containing 3 navigation links and a summary of the open enrollment versus special enrollment distinction. The email was professional. It included nothing that could be read as personal. Bella did not stop after the first call. She sent text messages with increasing volume across 2 days. The early messages framed me as overreacting. The middle messages framed me as cruel. The late messages framed me as mentally unwell. She suggested that my work had damaged me. She suggested that surgical practice produces emotional pathology and that my decisions reflected an occupational hazard rather than a considered position. I read each message and stored each one in a folder. I did not reply. On the third day after the audit, Bella posted a reel. The reel was filmed in her car. Her voice was practiced. She did not name me. She described a sister who chose her career over family and a successful relative who weaponized money to control the dynamic. She invited her followers to comment on whether they had ever experienced a sibling who became cold after success. The reel collected 19,000 likes within 6 hours. The comments were mostly performative empathy. A small portion identified the dynamic accurately. The empathy was stronger. The empathy became the engine of the reel's reach. By the end of the day, the reel had crossed 70,000 impressions. I screenshotted the reel, the comments that named me by association, and the timestamps. I sent the package to a media law attorney whom I had consulted twice before for unrelated reasons. She read the package within 2 hours. She replied that the post sat near the line that separates personal venting from defamation, and that the behavior pattern, if continued, could harden into actionable harm. She advised an immediate cease and desist letter through formal channels and a private warning to Bella that the content represented a legal liability rather than a creative expression. The letter cost me $350 to draft. The letter was 3 pages. The letter was polite. The letter requested removal of the reel within 72 hours and a written agreement that future content involving family financial matters would not be published without written consent. I sent the letter. Bella received it on a Tuesday afternoon. She did not call. She did not text. She removed the reel within 4 hours. She replaced it with a generic motivational reel about resilience that performed poorly. She sent one message after the takedown that read, "You really had to involve a lawyer?" I did not reply. The lawyer's letter was the reply. My father called the hospital lobby on the following day. He did not enter the building. He stood at the entrance and asked the security guard to call my office. The security guard followed protocol and called the trauma surgery administrative assistant, who knew me well and who recognized the situation as non-standard. She came to find me. I told her to inform my father, through security, that I was in clinical activity and that personal visits to the hospital were not supported by hospital policy. The administrative assistant relayed the message. My father waited in the lobby for 40 minutes before leaving. He did not return. I documented the visit in a personal log. I forwarded a brief, factual note to my chief, who had a standing relationship with hospital security. He acknowledged the note, advised that any future visits should be reported to security immediately, and offered to involve hospital legal counsel if the pattern continued. He did so without commentary or judgment. He had, like most senior surgeons, seen versions of this situation among colleagues over the years. My mother called my work line. She had obtained the number through a public directory, although she presented it as a discovery she had made through a friend. She left a message asking me to stop punishing the family. I did not return the call. I added the work line to a rule that filtered her number to a separate folder. Bella attempted a different angle. She emailed an editor at a small online publication that occasionally featured local healthcare professionals. Her email proposed a profile on me framed as a rising surgical leader who has navigated complicated family dynamics. The editor forwarded the email to me, because the editor had actually interviewed me a year earlier for a different feature and recognized the redirection. I thanked the editor. I asked her to disregard the pitch. I asked the editor to forward me Bella's email in full so that I could include it in my growing folder. The editor did so within an hour. I collected the emails, the real screenshots, the unsolicited media pitch, the ongoing texts, and the lobby visit into a single chronological dossier. I shared the dossier with my attorney. She advised that the case was strong enough to support a cease and desist with broader terms if any single element escalated. She also advised that I begin documenting all communications in writing, decline phone calls from family members, and request that any future requests for financial assistance arrive by email so that records would be preserved by default. I implemented each of those changes the same day. 2 weeks passed before the financial reality began to alter my family's behavior. The pattern of removal had been administrative and quiet, but the consequences moved through their lives like a slow surgical bleed that they could not stop because they did not own the instruments. My mother attempted to schedule a routine appointment at a specialist's office that had her old insurance information on file. The office ran the policy. The policy had terminated. The office clerk, polite and efficient, asked my mother how she would like to proceed. My mother called me from the parking lot in tears. She told me that she had been embarrassed in front of strangers. I told her that the embarrassment was an artifact of misalignment between her expectations and her current coverage. I told her that the marketplace was available, that subsidies often applied to her income range, and that the enrollment timeline allowed for coverage to begin within 60 days. I sent her, again, the navigation links and the special enrollment guidance. She told me she would handle it. She did not handle it for 10 days. Then she did. My father arrived at a car dealership intending to lease a different vehicle on the premise that his old pickup had become unreliable. He had assumed that his credit profile was sufficient. The dealership ran his profile. The dealership offered a rate substantially higher than the rate he had grown accustomed to during years of co-signed transactions. He left the dealership without a vehicle. He called me to ask whether I would co-sign. I told him that I would not. He told me that I had limited his options. I told him that his options were limited by his own financial profile and that my participation in his transactions had artificially inflated those options for years. He did not call me for 2 weeks. Aunt Carol enrolled in a marketplace plan after her 30-day timeline expired by 12 days. She incurred an out-of-pocket charge for a clinic visit during the gap. She paid it. She did not ask me to reimburse her, although she mentioned the amount in 2 separate messages in the hope that I would offer. I did not offer. She enrolled. The premium with subsidy was lower than the premium I had been carrying on her behalf. She did not acknowledge that fact, but she paid the premium. I followed up 6 weeks later through a brief, neutral email asking only whether her enrollment had completed. She replied that it had. Bella's content business contracted within 3 weeks of the credit card removal. She had relied on the card for restaurant content, travel content, and brand prop staging. Her followers continued to follow, but the engagement metrics flattened because the content shifted from aspirational lifestyle to routine commentary. She filmed in her apartment. She filmed her dog. She filmed her morning tea. The reels did not perform. She lost a brand collaboration that had been pending because the brand's contract required a minimum content cadence at a particular production quality. She wrote me a long message in which she alternated between accusation and pleading. The message contained a sentence that I copied verbatim into my dossier. The sentence read, "I cannot afford to be myself without your support." I did not reply. My father took a part-time position at a regional hardware store. He worked the floor in the lighting and electrical aisle. He told my mother, who told me through a relayed message from another aunt, that the work was beneath him. He did not speak to me directly about it for several months. The position was honest. It was paid. The hours were predictable. The income was modest. He had not held a position with predictable hours in 8 years. He resented it. The market did not care that he resented it. The market cared that he showed up, scanned inventory, and accepted compensation. My mother completed an enrollment at the marketplace and selected a plan with a high deductible because the premium was lowest at that tier. She complained about the deductible to her sister, who told her that high deductible plans are the price one pays when premiums must remain low and incomes must remain flat. The sister, my Aunt Carol, having recently completed the same exercise, said it without sympathy. My mother quieted on the topic. I returned to work after my personal day with no diminishment in my professional life. I performed, that week, a hemicolectomy on a man who had lost a fight with a delivery truck and a damage control laparotomy on a teenager whose father had asked me, after the case, what kind of person becomes a trauma surgeon. I told him that the kind of person who becomes a trauma surgeon is the kind of person who learns to keep working when the room is loud and the patient is bleeding and someone outside the room thinks the work is replaceable. He thanked me without understanding the comment. He had not been the audience. The audience had been my mother. The mother in his case was not the mother in mine, but the principle was identical. A different kind of pressure arrived through an unexpected channel a month later. My mother had begun mentioning to relatives that I had become unwell since the audit. She framed the financial separation as a symptom rather than a decision. She suggested that I had been overworked at the hospital, that surgery had hardened me, and that the family was concerned. She did not say these things to me. She said them to cousins, who repeated them to other cousins, who eventually wrote me well-meaning notes asking whether I was sleeping. I replied to each note with the same paragraph, factual and neutral, in which I stated that I was healthy, that the financial separation was a planned and rational adjustment, and that any concerns about my mental state were misinformed. The notes stopped within 10 days. The cousins were not malicious. They had been recruited. The recruitment effort failed because it required documentation that did not exist. There were no medical records of decline. There were no professional incidents. There were no missed shifts. My peer reviews continued to be strong. My case volume continued to be high. My complication rate remained within the expected range. My mother's narrative collapsed against the absence of evidence. She moved on to a different framing. She began telling people that I had been manipulated by a colleague, although she could not name the colleague. The story drifted in vagueness because vagueness was the only structure that her version could sustain. Bella tried to monetize the dynamic one more time. She launched a podcast in which she interviewed friends about family boundaries, a topic that was suddenly relevant to her. The podcast produced 4 episodes. The episodes did not gain traction because the host had a credibility problem that her audience could sense even when they could not articulate. By the 5th attempt, she switched topics to wellness routines. The audience preferred wellness routines. The podcast achieved modest stability and never returned to family boundaries as a theme. I noticed the silence with neither satisfaction nor regret. The data simply confirmed that audiences pay for content that respects them, and Bella had finally encountered an environment in which she could not draft from another account to subsidize her aesthetic. The mortgage decision matured along the timeline I had planned. After 3 months of correspondence with a real estate attorney and a property manager, I converted the condominium into a market-rate rental and offered my parents a written lease at a discount that approached charity but did not cross into subsidy. They declined. They insisted that family did not sign leases. I told them that family in our case had to sign a lease because 9 years of unwritten arrangements had produced precisely the situation we were now in. They refused to sign. I sent them a 30-day notice to vacate, certified mail, with the property manager copied. They moved into a smaller apartment in a less central neighborhood. The new rent was reasonable. The new neighborhood was safe. The downgrade was lateral on every measure except aesthetics. They treated the move as a tragedy. The market treated it as a routine transaction. The market was correct. A relative I had not spoken with in years called me unexpectedly during this period. She had heard fragments and wanted clarity. She was older. She had practiced law in another state. She listened without interrupting while I described the audit, the cancellations, the lease, and the dossier. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I represented women like you for 30 years. The ones who did not draw a line eventually got drawn over." She did not say anything further about the family. She asked me whether I had a will. She asked me whether I had a healthcare proxy. She asked me whether I had set up a trust. She walked me through the documents I had not finished. We met in person 3 weeks later and finalized them. A clean estate plan was the final stitch on the case. 6 months passed without a holiday gathering. I did not host one. They did not host one. There was no Thanksgiving photograph. There was no Christmas card. There was no group text exchange wishing one another well. The silence was complete in the social register. It was not complete in the administrative register. My mother sent 2 emails over those 6 months requesting clarification on minor charges that had appeared on her own card after the family plan separation. My father sent a single email asking whether I had retained the registration paperwork for the truck, which I had not, because the truck was now solely his responsibility. Aunt Carol sent a polite holiday message. I replied politely. Bella did not send anything. Bella's content cadence settled into a quieter version of her earlier work. She found a part-time job at a boutique. She did not advertise the job to her followers. I did not look for indicators of emotional improvement among them. The indicators that mattered were operational. Their bills were paid by the people who incurred them. Their commitments were signed by the people who used them. Their credit profiles reflected their actual capacity. The administrative ecosystem realigned with reality. That was the indicator. It was sufficient. My career advanced. I was offered a promotion to Associate Program Director within the Trauma Fellowship. The offer increased my responsibilities and my compensation. The increase was significant in absolute terms and in symbolic terms. I had built a financial life in which a promotion produced personal benefit rather than household reabsorption. The first month of the new salary was the first month in 9 years where the additional income did not flow into a relative's account. I noticed the difference. I did not celebrate. I did not call anyone. I made coffee. I read a paper on damage control resuscitation. I went to work. A patient came in one night during that period that I will not describe in detail because it is not mine to describe. What I will say is that during the case, while we were closing, a junior resident asked me how I had stayed steady over years of these cases. I told her that staying steady is a function of recognizing what is yours to fix and what is not. I told her that surgeons who cannot accept the limits of their own field tend to either burn out or become dangerous. I told her that the same principle applied to families. She did not understand the second half of the comment. She would, eventually, on her own timeline. The surgical lessons transfer slowly. The family lessons transfer slowly too. But they transfer. In trauma surgery, you triage by survival probability. You allocate resources to patients who can be saved. You document outcomes with precision because the documentation will outlive you. I had been triaging my family last for a decade. I had been allocating resources to a structure that could not be saved through additional resources because the structure was not designed to be saved. The structure was designed to consume. Compassion without boundaries is hemorrhage. I clamped the bleed. The wound closed. The wound did not close because the relationship healed. The wound closed because the bleeding stopped. Hemostasis is not reconciliation. It is survival. A scalpel is precise because it does not hesitate. Sutures hold because the tension is calibrated. Families function because the people inside them participate. Mine did not participate. They subscribed. I canceled the subscription. The unsubscribe was not cruelty. It was discharge planning. Boundaries are not rejection. They are stabilization. Stabilization is the only condition under which a system can recover. Some systems recover. Some do not. Either outcome is acceptable to a clinician who has accepted that not every patient survives every procedure. Not every family survives a clean ledger. Mine did not. I did. That was the alignment. The hands that my mother described as not soft are the hands that funded the home she lived in, the insurance she used, the trainer she enjoyed, the cruise she anticipated, and the wine she raised in a toast to my replaceability. Those hands continue to operate after the toast. They will continue to operate until they stop. When they stop, someone else will take the call. The trauma bay does not collapse when one surgeon retires. The family did not collapse when I closed the ledger. The narrative that my withdrawal was catastrophic was a story they told themselves to justify their dependency. Reality demonstrated, calmly, that they had access to the same systems available to every adult in the country. They used those systems. They survived. So did I. We survived in different rooms. If you have absorbed the financial life of a family that mocked the labor that funded it, write your story in the comments. Tell me the field you work in. Tell me the relatives who toasted your replaceability. Tell me the moment you decided to clamp the bleed. Your account may help someone else identify a hemorrhage they have been calling love. Stay precise. Stay rational. Stay closed. Thank you for staying through the story. The next case is already in the bay, and the work, as always, continues.